Well, hello. So glad we get the opportunity to continue our study of the miracles of Jesus, continue to see how the Lord's ministry is expanding, how the Gospels are building up this case, that at the end of it, it's going to be clear and undeniable that this was the Son of God and that he did come to save all of mankind. We got to take a look yesterday at Jesus calming the storm, demonstrating his power over the winds and the waves. And so today we actually get to see kind of the second half of that story because Jesus is crossing the sea for a reason. He's going across the Sea of Galilee to the other side to do something. There's got to be a reason for what he's doing over there, and that's really what this next story, the story of the Gerasene demoniac, is all about. And so this is also repeated in all three synoptic gospels. It takes place right after Jesus calming the storm on the Sea of Galilee. And so we're going to pick up in Luke's account. We're going to take a look at specifically Luke and Mark, but we're also going to note a little bit of a difference in Matthew's account as well. And so in Luke chapter 8 and verse 26, it says that then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. When he came out onto the land, he was met by a man from the city who was possessed with demons and who had not put on any clothing for a long time and was not living in a house but in the tombs. Seeing Jesus, he cried out and fell before him and said in a loud voice, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded that the unclean spirit come out of the man. For it had seized him many times, and he was bound with chains and shackles and kept under guard. And yet he would break his bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They were imploring him not to command them to go away into the abyss. Now there was a herd of many swine feeding there on the mountain, and the demons implored him to permit them to enter the swine. He gave them permission. The demons came out of the man, entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they ran away and reported it in the city and out in the country. The people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting down at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they became frightened. Those who had seen it reported to them how the man who was demon-possessed had been made well. And all the people of the country of the Gerasenes and the surrounding district asked him to leave them, for they were gripped with great fear, and he got into a boat and returned. But the man from whom the demons had gone out was begging him that he might accompany him. But he sent him away, saying, "Return to your house and describe what great things God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. So we've got a couple of things that we want to break down here, kind of understanding what's going on. The first is the location of this is very important. And so you've had Jesus in the region of Galilee. Capernaum's been kind of his home base of city, but we've seen him in several different areas. We've seen him in the city of Cana. We've seen him in the city of Nain. We've seen him even venturing into the region of Samaria up until this point. Now, though, he's crossing the Sea of Galilee to the other side. And on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, you were no longer in Galilee or Judea. You weren't even, in fact, in traditional Judah territory. You were now in an area often known as the Decapolis. This was a grouping of 10 cities that was still part of the realm of Herod the Idumean, but this was Gentile territory. And so that's very significant for us to understand. And we're made aware of this because pigs, which were a traditionally unclean animal in the Mosaic law, would not have been found anywhere near a Jewish settlement. And so the fact that there's this massive herd of pigs, we're very clearly in Gentile territory. That's important for us to understand as we're going forward. So Jesus has come to the Gentiles, and most of the time, Jesus is pretty clear about the fact that his ministry is not to the Gentiles. His ministry, very specifically, is to the Jewish people, and then the apostles are going to pick up on that Gentile ministry. It seems significant, though, here that Jesus, with his disciples, are coming over here, and as we're going to see at the end of the story, instituting somebody to tell the story of Jesus to the Gentiles. And so we're going to kind of touch on that in a minute. But so he is in Gentile territory, and he comes across this man who is a demoniac. And as we've seen, this is not the first time that Jesus has encountered a dark spiritual force. We've seen it several times in the Old Testament, or several times in the Gospels, to this point. We saw it in the synagogue in Capernaum where Jesus had cast out a demon. We know that Mary Magdalene, one of the women who was following Jesus at this point in time, has had 7 demons cast out of her, kind of emphasizing a even greater exorcism. Well, now here we have a man who is one of the worst cases we see. It's one of the most tragic stories in the Bible. Mark adds to this detail that he has overpowered anyone who has tried to come and restrain him. And so he is a pariah. He is hurting himself. Mark records that he's cutting himself, that he's throwing himself against the rocks, that he has been bound and chained, and he breaks the chains in his great rage. And so this is, you almost, to me, I'm picturing the Hulk. I'm picturing the big green giant superhero who's just constantly in a rage and is hurting himself through it. And so this is a really tragic story. And no one has been able to stop this guy. No one's been able to bind him with chains. No one's been able to stop him. And yet from a great distance, it says that he saw this guy and he comes immediately to Jesus. He cries out and he falls before him. And it's this, it's almost the image of, an inferior falling to his knees to a superior, somebody seeing the king and falling down begging for mercy. And we've talked before about how there's kind of subtle battles going on between Jesus and the demons, that when these demons are recognizing who Jesus is, it is an admission of who he is. It is a recognition of his power, but it also is likely an attempt to gain some sense of control over Jesus. And so when he names him, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God, he's trying to assert his authority. I know who you are. You're the Son of God. You can't torment. Don't torment me. You have no power here. And Jesus then reverses that and basically says, okay, well, you tell me your name then. And he says that he's Legion. And a legion is a Roman military unit. It's typically about 6,000 men. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are 6,000 demons in this man, but it means that there is a great horde of demons. Even more so than Mary Magdalene having 7 demons, this guy has a large regiment of demons attached to him. It explains why he is so strong, and yet he is also so tormented. And it's also expanding and showing the fact that this is something that shows the true power of Jesus. Remember, we talked about that there was Jewish exorcism up until this point. There was people who could cast out demons. We're even going to see later on in the gospel narrative that there are other people not necessarily affiliated with Jesus that are casting out demons in his name. And so Jesus is not the only one who has demonstrated power to cast out exorcism, but no one has been able to do this. No one has been able to contain this particular case because it's so bad. And so he very quickly demonstrates his power over this regiment, that even this great demonic force is unable to control Jesus. He is in firm control over the situation. And so Mark adds an interesting detail that they basically ask him, have you come to torment us before the time? That reveals an interesting detail about the demons, that apparently the demons might even be aware that there is a time coming where the Son of the Most High God will utterly destroy them, cast them into the abyss. It's described in Revelation as the lake of fire. Perhaps they're aware that there is a time coming. Their time is limited, and they're wondering why Jesus has come before that time. And particularly, they would also probably be surprised to see the Jewish Messiah here in a Gentile land. This is not where they would expect to find him. And so they then make a very curious request that they ask to be sent into the pigs. And Jesus grants that request. And we're not really told why that exactly is, why it is that Jesus does not just destroy these demons utterly, doesn't just cast them out. There's a couple different possibilities. It's possible that Jesus is thinking that this large number of demons, if they're just cast out, perhaps they go infect somebody else. More likely, I think what's likely occurring here is that Jesus is trying to display his power. He's trying to make a point to the broader community. And so using this large number of pigs to demonstrate the power of these demons and to demonstrate his power over these demons, that clearly makes an impact upon this community. It clearly makes an impact on this demoniac individual. And so that was probably likely what I think is going on here, of why Jesus cast them into the herd of pigs, is to demonstrate his power. And certainly it's an appropriate thing for these unclean spirits to be cast into an unclean herd of swine. Sometimes there are people who criticize this. They say, this is a big economic waste. It's not a very humane thing to do to the pigs that have done nothing wrong. But it clearly shows Jesus's concern for people over the lesser parts of creation, that Jesus is ultimately most concerned about this demoniac soul more so than he is whatever may happen to these pigs after that. Although notice, Jesus doesn't tell the demons to go take the pigs. He doesn't tell the demons to destroy the pigs. He just essentially lets them go do this. And so it's not really authoritative so much as permissive that he lets them do these things. But the most important part about all of this, I know we just kind of ranted a little bit there, the most important part about this is the responses that this draws out. And it's really twofold, because you see that the demoniac responds with great faith. The demoniac is very aware of what's going on. The Gerasenes do not. In fact, so they see this miracle. It's undeniably a powerful thing, because none of them have been able to stop this demoniac. They're aware of who he is. They've tried to bind him. They've tried to stop him with their own strength, and they haven't been able to do that. But Jesus has been able to do this. But they don't want Jesus here. It says that when they figure out what's happening, when they see the destruction of the pigs, they fear. And their fear drives them to ask Jesus, hey, you're too much trouble here. Yeah, that's great, you cured a demoniac, but, you cost us a bunch of pigs, and we don't really want you here. And there's one commentator who has said, how long has man often chosen their pigs over the Son of God? And so the greatest thing that has ever happened in this part of the world, they rejected. And they say, no, you go back to the other side of the lake. You go be Galilee's problem. We don't want to deal with you here. And so they reject the Messiah. But the demoniac, as he's getting into the boat, the demoniac basically is clinging to him. It's like, please, let me come with you. Let me be a disciple. And what might surprise us is that Jesus says no. Jesus basically says, no, you stay over here. And at first that might seem, maybe this is callousness, maybe this is Jesus doesn't really want a Gentile disciple yet while he's working in the Jewish area. But notice what he tells this man to do. A lot of times Jesus, when he performs miracles, he tells people, hey, don't go talk a lot about this. Be quiet about this, keep this to yourselves, because he's really concerned about people misunderstanding the nature of the Christ. And so he tells them, hey, keep this to yourself. He silences the demons that identify him as the Son of God, because he wants to control the narrative. He wants people to come to this conclusion on their own terms. But over here in this Gentile region, there wouldn't be as much threat about that. They wouldn't be as familiar with the messianic prophecies, and they probably didn't have the same misconceptions. And so instead, he tells this man, you return to your house and describe what great things God has done for you. He's essentially telling this guy, go be an evangelist. Go tell these people what God has done for you, what the one true God has done for you. And notice that Luke does this very, very subtle, but narrative switch. He says, so he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. And so this Gentile, this former demoniac, we get the sense that he's one of the first people to make the connection that Jesus and God are the same here. It's a very subtle point of Christology, but it's a very important one, that this unnamed demoniac, he goes and he's essentially the first, if we can use the term in its technical definition, he's the first apostle to the Gentiles. He's the first one sent out. Now, obviously, he's not an apostle in that full loaded sense of the term, but he's the first messenger of God and the first messenger of Jesus to the Gentiles. Go proclaim the good news of what the Son of God has done. That's pretty incredible. And so this man is given a tough task. The rest of the disciples, they're going to go back with Jesus and they're going to go back and be with him. He's left here to proclaim the good news of God to the Gentiles. And it's really foreshadowing how ultimately the disciples and the apostles, they're going to follow in that same footstep, and they also will go out and proclaim the good news, not just to the Jews, but to all of the world. And so we see just in a small slice here that even though Jesus is primarily concerned with the proclamation to the Jews and fulfilling the kingdom message, going through the old law, he also is laying the groundwork for the whole world to hear the good news of Jesus. And so we see in this interesting case of the demoniac, we see the power of God at work, not just in Judea, but in the entire world. He's starting to change things. Just a really brief note in conclusion. One of the things that comes up in this study is that Matthew, if you go over to his section in Matthew chapter 8, you'll notice that Matthew's account, number one, is way shorter. Matthew really kind of abbreviates what's going on here. But it also says in verse 28 that when he came to the other side into the country of the Gadarenes, Two men who were demon-possessed met him as they were coming out of the tombs. They were so violent that no one could pass by that way. And it's the same story, but there's two people this time. Is Matthew getting this wrong? Does Matthew have a wrong recollection of what happens? Remember, at this point, he's one of the disciples, so he's an eyewitness to this. Why is he saying there's two? The text doesn't explicitly say. What my suspicion is that notice that Luke talks about these herdsmen go out and they kind of proclaim this all over the place. They talk about it in the city, in the country, and then a large crowd comes to Jesus and they find the demoniac already clothed and sitting at the feet of Jesus. More than likely, Jesus is at this area for more than just a couple of minutes. I don't think this is all taking place in the course of an hour. He's probably there for a few days. He's probably there for at least some amount of time so that word gets out and they finally come and ask him to go leave. So what's possible here is that Matthew is remembering a second demoniac who was cured in this region and is kind of lumping the two stories together. That's one possibility. I think there's a decent likelihood of that happening. I don't know if I can prove that 100% from the text. But one of the important things to understand about these kind of discrepancies in the text is that we don't have to prove whether these things, what exactly occurred. We just have to be able to say that there's compatibility available with this. That this doesn't prove that Matthew and Luke and Mark are somehow incompatible with one another, that there's conflict in the text. It could be that Matthew's just adding a detail that Luke and Mark didn't really think was necessary to add here. So these two stories are not incompatible, even though these two details might be different. So that was just a point I wanted to make here because it often comes up in this story, particularly as you're studying the Synoptic Gospels, as you see these differences arise. Remember, it's not critical that you explain exactly what happened. The text certainly isn't concerned with it. Really, what we just want to be assured of is that they're not incompatible. These details are not mutually exclusive to one another. I hope this gives you some good things to think about as we continue these studies into the miracles of Jesus. I hope that has been edifying to you to look at these, again, kind of in a more holistic light, seeing how all of these miracles are building up the overall gospel story of Jesus. We'll continue on with these next time. We thank you so much for taking the time to study these things with us. We encourage you. We pray that you continue to be safe, that you continue to be well. We love you guys and we miss you. We can't wait to see you next time.